everyone. My name is Gus Waite. I'm the managing broker for Station Cities here in the tri-state area. And we're a real estate division of DwellWorks, which is the largest corporate provider of housing for executives moving around the world. So we move about 32,000 people around the world. And I'm in charge of 100 agents here in New York City, Connecticut, and New Jersey. And today I'm joined by Sonya Weisshappel of Seriatim, who has a really interesting business. I'll let you know before we get started, I'm a Virgo and my mother was German, so I'm all about, as you are, creating order out of chaos. Yes. And you are a professional organizer, and I looked at your website a little bit. I noticed that you had 5-star reviews on Google, and you are a woman-owned business since 1999. And so before we get started, because before this we were sharing stories about New York, I'm just curious, like, what happened in 1999 that got you into this? What mistakes happened where you started this business?
In 93, I got introduced to the concept of organizing while I was trying to write a resume. And being a dyslexic and having a hard time writing a resume, I asked everyone I knew what I'm good at, and the word organized kept coming up. And that was just how I think and how I process. And ultimately, I went to the phone book, and there were 3 organizers in the phone book. I called 3 of them. One of them didn't return the call. One returned the call and said, I don't have staff. And one hired me off the that phone call, and I went on my first job, and I was like, wow, you get paid for this? This is what I do in my downtime. So I worked for her for a long time. And then I went overseas for my backpacking. And when I came back, I opened my own company.
Wow. It reminds me of that great Napoleon Hill quote that every adversity has within it the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit. And your dyslexia, and you're reaching out to folks to kind of say, hey, what am I good at? And coming up with the organization. I mean, it looks like you've built a career on that adversity, or that was the seed of it anyway.
Well, actually, it's funny because it's not funny, but in the relocation world, I was job transferred with my father and my mother from San Francisco to New York when I was 13. And I landed like you did in New York, scooping ice cream and, a young age. I landed on the Upper West Side, new from San Francisco, brand new, kind of like, wow, this is very loud, very different, very new. And we lived in temporary housing. My father worked for Shearson American Express, all expense paid job transfer, but he got terminally ill in the process and passed within the year of our arrival, having uprooted our whole life to have come here. So that introduced me into the job transferring world as a 13-year-old. And it never quite left my mind. But I also have a family member who is a geriatric nurse, and another one who's an architect, interior designer. And my mom is an original Corcoran broker, having grown up in the city. So I grew up as an only child with Barbara Corcoran at the office, and I learned a lot about real estate. I knew a lot about architecture and interior design, geriatric caregiving, and then, of course, the life experience of losing a parent and moving across the country. So all of that is what is the foundation for Seriatim.
Well, and that's really interesting because you bring up one of the things that, and I often joke with new transferees, especially from overseas, that moving to New York is a 5-step process: denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. And,
absolutely.
Right. And, these folks, and I find the higher up the scale they are, the more denial and angrier and depressed, because there's this image of moving to New York that, wow, I got $10,000 a month. I'm going to live like a queen over here. And so I would imagine, in the same way that as real estate brokers, we really need to deal with that emotional transition. Then if you've got family involved and maybe one person wanted to move and the other person didn't, and you've got that dynamic. I'm curious with your business, because people get really emotional about their stuff.
Yes, they do.
It means more than, to other people. And I'm sure even within a couple, I've often found that you have one person that likes to hold on to stuff and one person that wants to get rid of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So how have you sort of dealt with that piece of it through your career?
Oh, it is a constant story. We could fill the airways for days about the stories related to the navigation around the emotions of stuff. But what I have built a career primarily because of the relocation industry in particular, when you are dealing with someone's objects and you are dealing with them in a time of great denial, fuzzy-headedness, perhaps a spat with a spouse, or children that are uncomfortable with their new surroundings, they're not thinking as clearly. And there's a lot of moving parts. And often when you're coming from out of the city into the city, they didn't prune or scale back what they have enough to actually fit into the smaller spaces or the hallways or the elevators that New York offers. If they can take it all, great. If they can't take it all, it's a negotiation. It's one thing if you have two blenders and you're like, that one's 10 years old, this one's brand new, we'll keep that one. It's another when it's like, this was my mother's. No, this was my father's. And you don't need two sofas kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's so interesting because I can't tell you how many times I've been with an executive. They've told me exactly what they want. I found the price, the size, the neighborhood, the type of building, the school district, and they're not saying yes. And then it turns out that they have a 12-person dining room set on a cargo ship on the way from Paris. And all of a sudden, the most important factor is a dining room big enough for that table. And and as you're laughing, but that becomes a thing.
It's a real thing.
Yeah, it's a real thing. And especially if the spouse who didn't want to come to New York, it's her family or his family's table. There's a lot of power dynamics within couples, and I see you shaking your head and agreeing.
It's emotionally charged.
Right.
It's absolutely emotionally charged. Someone can say it's the dining room table, but what about the collection of salt and pepper shakers that goes floor to ceiling on 1,000 little shelves? That's a art piece that needs to be moved, but maybe you're looking at an apartment that's all windows and you don't have a wall space for that. They're not going to take it. So without a real estate agent understanding visually, not only the couple in front of them or the individual in front of them, but the stuff that they're trying to house in their space, I think you're flying a little blind. And that's why we work with a lot of real estate agents to share what it is that we have and we know. But when you have someone who has 150 pairs of shoes and you've got a closet that can only fit 30, you've got an issue.
Or like Carrie Bradshaw, you're going to be putting your shoes in the oven since nobody cooks.
That's right. That's
exactly.
Right. Or you put your files in the oven, whatever it takes.
Right. Which is a nice transition. Now, I know we're in the middle of COVID when we're talking about this, but before we get to that, we were on the phone earlier, and we both moved to New York City when we were 13. And I had mentioned I had this sort of very eccentric uncle who had the first Haagen-Dazs ice cream shop on the corner of Christopher and Bleecker. And I came in from Connecticut, and West Village in the early 70s. This was sort of pre-AIDS disco. My first visual in the village was a 6'6" transvestite on roller skates in a fairy godmother outfit. And I remember that being and I joke about it, but such a formative experience at that age.
Absolutely.
In the recognition that my worldview was so limited and that the scope of humanity was so much wider, that I've always had a love affair with New York City. I've always felt like it's represented the best of humanity, the best hope for the future. It's a place where people come to become something greater than they already are. And I trace a lot of that back to just that wonder of a 13-year-old coming to New York City for the first time. And I wonder what your experience is. I know your dad passed shortly after that, but what was your experience of New York City then?
I grew up in San Francisco, and I grew up in the time of a lot of sexual freedom pre-AIDS in San Francisco. And given that my aunt and my mom ran an architectural interior design company, all the designers and the creatives were, you know, with the feather boas on the weekends and in, you know, drag. And so my perspective of all the different, the Chinese, the Japanese, the gay population, the Haight-Ashbury of San Francisco was in my blood. And then I got to New York, and it's all here, but it was more gritty and louder and more agitated. But it was also, you added in so much more of the European cultures, the pockets of the neighborhoods. We used to spend so much time, my mom and I, after my dad passed, exploring areas of the city where it was like, this is the light bulb district, and this is this is the button district.
Right.
And look at and just the layer of looking at, you know, like learning to put a football helmet on mentally and walking down the street because you're dealing with the onslaught of people coming, and there's a rhythm. And as a non-New Yorker at that time, you're not as accustomed to falling in the right lane of the flow, and you cause backups. So once we learned that flow, then you can start to kind of look upwards, and you realize there's a whole world above what's on the ground level that is fascinating in itself. And I just, New York is a layer upon layer upon layer of spaces and interesting stories. And I adore it. I adore everything about it. And I've come to appreciate the noise and the phoneticness. I have a 15-year-old, and when all my girlfriends were having kids, you know, here's my kid at 18 months able to hail a cab, you know.
Right.
Like, you know, that's a skill that it's,
Yeah.
you know, now they call Uber, but at the time she could call a cab. Whereas my other girlfriends, their kids are like, they're, you know, holding their ears and crying against the wall, not sure what to do with themselves. And, you know, she's like, I need a cab. And she, like, New York, it's in your blood. So
it does. And you and I have lived through when Ford told the city to drop dead, and the AIDS crisis, and the financial crisis, and, you know,
September 11th.
Right. And the 2008 and all of that. So listen, we're hearing a lot of noise now about, you know, the cities are over and everybody's going to work from home forever. I've been working from home now for 4 months, and I'm sure you feel this way. I miss being able to get in, get around people, walk around, go down to Eisenberg's on 22nd and 5th and get a BLT and a pea soup at the counter. I believe that the city is going to come back, but I think I'm curious from your perspective, what that's changed during COVID is going to continue that change. So I'll give you an example. You know, virtual tours of apartments, video tours of apartments, maybe people from overseas wanting to do a lot more virtually, and then waiting until the last 2 or 3 apartments that are finalized to go see it. I think that's going to move forward. I believe, and I think the landlords in denial are right now, I believe we're going to see a serious reduction in rents. Now, right now, it's not happening because the landlords are holding tight. But I believe we're going to have an opportunity to have the city be more like when you and I were young, where the rents are going to come down, and that's going to give an opportunity for a whole new wave of young people to come to New York and try their hand at this magnificent city. What are your thoughts?
I would concur that there is some shape shifting. And I think one of the conversations that I had with one of your fellow team recently was all about the fact that we do a lot of high net worth moving. So in the last few months since COVID began, since March, been FedExed a lot of sets of keys and just said, I'm in my second home. I need my property packed up, orchestrated. This is what I care about. this is it. I agree. There is a mass exodus out of the city right now for those who in particular had second, third, fourth homes. Those people are deciding, I don't need to be in New York. It's not worth the risk. Those who have one home and this is their home, they're here. I do think that we are going to see a younger wave. I don't know. I can't speak to the rates and the things ebbing and flowing, but I do believe that, I don't believe that it's over. I believe that it's like a wave went out and then it will come back in.
Got it. And the other thing I'm going to ask you, so what parts of what you do are the parts that you love? You know what I mean? Yes. Yeah. What parts do you love about it?
I love the camaraderie. I love the community. I love the lining up of the vendors. I love the mind meld of we can do this and get this done. I love someone not being alone. I mean, I really watched my mother struggle when my father took ill after the job transfer before he passed. We were living in temporary housing. We were in the midst of renovation. We had closed on an apartment, trying to get that apartment ready. All of our stuff is in storage in California. He took so sick that we knew that it was going to be the last Thanksgiving. So we had to scale back the renovation, get the delivery, set up the home, and have the family come in to celebrate for the last holidays together. It was so painful for my mom and myself that I created a business to cathartically work that through. But I really love that level of collaboration. I love the problem solving. No two moves are the same. But I really think that ultimately the part that I love, because of the loss of my dad, because I know that you can't take it with you. King Tut in the 70s taught me that, you can't take it with you. Even the king can't take his stuff with him. So you're not going to get your stuff, with you on the other side either. So you better make some arrangements for it.
Just to switch a little bit, the question I was going to ask you is, what do you think people's greatest misconceptions are about New York or greatest surprises? And I'll give you one of mine.
Okay.
I will often take moms who are very concerned about their kids moving into the big, scary city and bring them to the public school about 15 minutes before class lets out and just say, hey, listen, just start talking to some parents and they'll give you everything you need to know. And one of the things that I find, especially mothers are shocked about, is the degree of cooperation and support that you'll get from other mothers. And also because we're not a car culture and we're a pedestrian culture, there's so much more opportunity to actually form community in an organic, natural way, as opposed to having to drive somewhere and sort of introduce yourself to the group. So I think that's one of the, I get people that move from the Midwest that go, oh my gosh, I have more mom friends here than I did back in Cleveland because we're always hanging out together. We're at the park together. And I also find that people sort of deal with the smallness or the compromises they need to make in their housing. That isn't a thing when it's laid up against the excitement of the city and the restaurants and the scene and the fact that their kids are around such a diverse culture, that the excitement of the city is more than they had anticipated. So what about you? What are some of the surprises you think or misconceptions people have that turn out to not be true?
In New York, your family are your connections. Your family, as you talked with this pedestrian piece, I do a lot of walking meetings. I do a lot of talking on the phone, walking places. I have great friends from all walks of life. You go to the gym, you go to the school, you go to a local deli or something, the faces. You go to the dog park, people know you. These are your relationships. And I think right now people are missing that because people are trying to stay home and be more mindful to go out. But New York offers that. And I feel such an abundance of friendships and relationships. So to me, that's a very big part of coming to New York. And you're right, you don't need as much entertainment within the home because you have it outside the home. I can see that. Misconception, I think that people don't need as much stuff as they think they do.
Mm-hmm. So let me end with this. First of all, I see, this is why I love New York, because you're a New Yorker, I'm a New Yorker. We could talk. We could,
for days.
We're sharing story time. And I live up in Harlem, and I love Washington Heights down. I bring my kids up to Malacone, a Dominican restaurant on 172nd. Listen, everyone has been talking about this. Nobody knows what the next 6 months or even a year looks like, I think, in terms of moving in and out. I know that you mentioned a lot of high net worth individuals right now are moving out of New York City. But what is your thought? Let's put ourselves in the summer of 2021. There's medical advances. There's a sense that we're all in this together. We've started to figure out protocols, and people have been sort of locked up for 18 months. And this ends. We can see the end in sight. What do you see happening in New York at that point?
Oh, I see. I mean, right now, my movers, I'm the head of the Relocation Society of New York, NYCOR, for decades. And maybe it's a decade and a bit, I can't even remember. But I love it. And having had discussions with a lot of the moving companies owners of late, they're having a jammed year. They are absolutely off the charts busy. And I don't think that is going to remain the same. I think there's going to be a wave of that busy, and then there's going to be a lull. But I think by the time we get to a year from now, it's going to have evened out, and that there will be those adventurous souls coming back into the city for a little bit of a try to make the city work, filling up the gaps of where people left. I mean, I have clients, someone who's lived in his apartment for 17 years decided that he's going to give up his man cave for the first time in 17 years and stay at his beach house from now on. And he wouldn't have done that. He was absolutely happy to keep on with that, but this taught him. But that's a mid-priced rental that is now available, and the building will have more available, and so more people can come in. And I think it will be good. I really do think it will be good. I do think some of the price adjustments will need to take place. Maybe the renovations within the spaces won't happen as often as they have been. But New Yorkers, they just survive. And they really just survive. And they may change shape, size, and color, but those gaps get filled.
Well, the good news, Sonya, is we both love New York. We
Yes.
both love helping people move to New York, and we're doing our real estate piece and settling in piece. And you've got this great organizational piece and then some. And I'm really, really grateful that you jumped on the line with us today at the last minute. This is a first of what I hope is going to be a series of podcasts of people who love New York and the tri-state area and giving information to people on what they need to do. I'm sure that Kim at the end of this will put in your contact information, but can you give us a contact for you just so it's on the videotape here if someone wants to get in touch with you?
Sure. Our website is seriatim.net. So that's SERIATIM.net. Seriatim.net. It means in a series, and normally it's a series of steps to get organized, and it's a process from chaos to harmony. So we'd love to help you. And if you need more topics or you want to talk about other things anytime, happy to help you and DwellWorks and Station City, all those new pieces of the company. Happy to be there.
Absolutely. And listen, we'll have to meet at that little $2 coffee shop on 142nd and Broadway. They're letting people, you know which one I'm talking about.
Yes, yes. And there's also Monkey Cup up near us too.
All right. And
know,
they're doing outdoor dining or outdoor coffeeing right now.
Yes, that's right. Outdoor coffeeing. And there's just up near us, there's some fabulous food. There's fabulous, I mean, Dominican and Middle Eastern and the Grange has great beers and burgers right near Hamilton's house. I mean, there's some wonderful things.
Great.
So,
well,
anytime.
Sonya, I absolutely, sincerely want to meet you in person because there's other stuff I'd love to talk about, but it was an absolute pleasure. And please enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you both. Cheers.
All right. Thanks, Sonya.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.